Hello, Serious Survivor here, and this is the second video in the Stages of the Apocalypse series. This video would detail the events and circumstances that one or a group may encounter and be faced with during, shortly after, and in the long term following a complete nuclear apocalypse. Stating nuclear apocalypse, I mean that the entire world is affected by a nuclear war or similar, one in which the majority of the nuclear weapons has successfully made it to their destinations and have caused global destruction or destruction on a level that mankind will be changed forever and reduced or simplified to the most basic of lifestyles and most dangerous of environments. This video will detail the events if nuclear weapons are detonated as an air burst. Surface burst details will be discussed in a later video. The world currently has approximately 15,000 nuclear weapons. There are 9 countries that declare the possession and capabilities of nuclear weapons. These are Russia, the United States, Great Britain, India, Pakistan, China, Israel, France, and North Korea. Of all these nations, nuclear proliferation has prevented wars throughout history. Yet the simple fact that these weapons exist in our arsenals mean that somewhere along the line, someone will attempt or successfully use them. Even the most sophisticated anti-missile or missile defense systems, which are currently developed, possessed, and employed by the United States, there are still hundreds, maybe thousands, of nuclear missiles getting through these invisible protective barriers and hitting their designated targets. There are basically 2 types of nuclear weapons, fission and fusion. The hydrogen bomb is a fusion bomb which relies on the process of nuclear fusion to create and release kinetic energy. The hydrogen bomb is already the global standard for all 5 of the nations who currently possess the greatest nuclear numbers and capabilities: the United States, Russia, France, Britain, and China. Other nations may also either have this technology or are currently working on it. With that knowledge, we know that the world's arsenal are comprised of mostly fusion weapons, with about 7,500 total weapons being possessed by countries that could possibly be considered military threats, such as Russia, China. The payload or power of these nuclear weapons possessed by other countries ranges from 100 kilotons to 10.4 megatons, with China's current Dongfeng at a massive 5.5 megatons, which is currently the Chinese ICBM of choice. The largest ever tested was by the Soviet Union, was named the Tsar Bomba, at a massive and almost unimaginable payload of 50 megatons, and the largest ever designed at 100 megatons. The largest ever tested by the U.S. was the Castle Bravo at 15.5 megatons. Stage 1, the event. Stage 1 is the event itself. Stage 1 will last from the instant of the event until about the first week. Let's begin with the premise that nuclear war has begun and that nuclear weapons have hit their targeted destinations around the globe, and the majority of the major objectives were struck. When the bombs drop, the missiles hit, the devastation is immediate. Within the first few seconds, the world is forever changed. If the average size nuclear weapon possessed by nations other than the U.S. is detonated at its primary locations, then cities like New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., Seattle, Dallas, Miami, Boston, Detroit, Phoenix, and the list goes on, would be laid to rubble and the population reduced by possibly 80% or more. With major strikes happening at the heart of the largest and most populated areas, those within these areas may not survive the initial blast. The initial blast would nearly immediately be followed with secondary and tertiary strikes, which would then devastate what remnants of these once great cities still remained. Nearly 90% of the world's population lives in urban areas. New York alone, over 11 million people, all within the range of one 50 megaton thermonuclear weapon. So it would be natural and logical to assume that if the initial strikes that do make it through, billions would be incinerated in the first few seconds and milliseconds. The nations and the world's population would be devastated, decimated, but not extinct and not totally defeated. The human race has proven itself very resilient through the millennia. But after the devastation from the initial explosions, the determining factor in survival would be the fallout. Fallout is the radioactive particles that fall to Earth as a result of nuclear explosions. It consists of weapons, debris, fission products. Fallout particles, they can vary in size from thousandths of a millimeter to several millimeters to even larger. Much of this material will fall directly back down close to ground zero within a few minutes after the explosion, but some travels high into the atmosphere, and this material will be dispersed over the Earth during the following hours, days, and months. Even so, beyond the blast radius of the exploding weapon or weapons, there would be areas, or what are called hot spots, that survivors could not enter because of radioactive contamination from long-lived radioisotopes like strontium-90 or cesium-137. For the survivors of a nuclear war, this type of lingering radiation hazard could represent a grave and dire threat for as long as 1 to 5 years after the attack. Predicting the amount and levels of the radioactive fallout would be extremely difficult due to several factors. These factors include the yield, the design of the weapon, the height of the explosion, the nature of the surface beneath the point of the burst, and the meteorological or weather conditions such as wind direction and speed. An airburst would generally produce minimal fallout if the fireball does not touch the ground. During the first phase, those who do survive the initial event will either be ones who have the luxury of owning a fallout shelter or the people who live well away from the large urban areas. These people will definitely have more time to react and to prepare for the aftermath than those living internal to the cities. Those who live in or near the urban areas will have to evaluate their location and determine if it is necessary to evacuate immediately or if the event may not have fully impacted them and staying at their current location would be feasible. For example, if they live or are located outside the city limits and are in a suitable and stable structure, their location may have been protected from the blast or out of range. Also, at this point, the weather patterns of your particular area will cause a tremendous difference in the reaction of people. If the area has winds that normally prevail in the direction that would push the radioactive particles away from your position, then evacuation may not be necessary immediately. Yet if the winds or weather patterns are likely to push the fallout closer to you and your position, then immediate evacuation will be an absolute necessity. The airburst detonation would serve two purposes, the first being an explosion of immense proportion, and the second is the fact that an airburst detonated in the atmosphere is actually a massive EMP or an electromagnetic pulse. And this would very likely result in a grid down scenario also. Maybe not worldwide, as there would be isolated pockets that are not affected or in range of these blasts. Determining how much fallout is present and how much radiation exposure one is exposed to would not be easy without specialized equipment. If these types of equipment are not available, then people will have to err on the side of caution and evacuate the area to a more rural location. In the first stage, the initial losses would not even be assessed, and those affected would not know how far the event ranges or how far to evacuate. This once again expresses the true need for advanced planning. This is because without any type of plan, people will not have a clue as to where to go or which direction to head in. This event will be different than some of the others. Immediately afterwards, whatever stores or buildings that did remain will quickly be relieved of their goods and supplies by those surviving. A nuclear explosion in the center of an urban area would cause loss of power and water immediately to those within 50 to 100 and maybe as far as 150 to 200 miles range of the event. And one could also assume that the nuclear and other power plants are also devastated from the initial attack. This means that a nuclear attack is most likely a combination of the attack itself and a complete grid down resulting from the immediate destruction and EMP pulse. Leaving the urban area will be the deciding factor in the beginning. Those who stay will risk succumbing to the subsequent fallout and contamination from the area in general, the atmosphere, food stores, and the water supplies. This will be a slow and agonizing death, and without modern medicine, there are not many treatments available for those with radiation sickness and poisoning. For those leaving the urban area, they should expect that the rural population has already reacted to the event, but in a different way. Those living in rural or country areas will not be affected immediately from the blast. They will also be aware that survivors from the cities will quite possibly be migrating in their direction, and most will prepare accordingly. Surviving the first stage. To survive the first stage will be difficult, especially if one is within close proximity to the event or events. The basic skills are always needed for any survival situation, especially one that has taken the grid completely down and urban areas and facilities are mostly destroyed or inaccessible. Distance between you and the event will be key and will quite possibly be the major defining factor. Other than distance, supplies are critical. The necessary supplies for survival and traveling through a contaminated area are contamination suits and gas masks, Geiger counters, meters. If the items are feasible for you, then make sure the types you acquire are truly rated for these events. Check the manufacturer's ratings and verify these ratings. Also, if a gas mask is available, then make sure the filters are rated appropriately also. So before making these expensive purchases, make sure to verify not only with the manufacturers, but through research, the brand and the rating that you are purchasing will stand up to chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear events. Potassium iodide and similar medical treatments are easily available to the general public. These can be purchased online at anywhere between $20 and up, depending on how much you would like to spend. So for this type of event, the appropriate gear is essential. And if you live in the interior of a city or large metropolitan area, then you may want to consider investing in this type of equipment. If not, then planning is the best bet. Plan before this type of thing happens. Formulate a plan for you and your family that will enable you to safely make it to locations that are far from the center of large cities. In addition to one plan, have several backup plans or routes. Although the basic premise of your plan will be the same, have multiple routes that your group can take to rendezvous at previously chosen locations, preferably locations with adequate water supplies or access to water, and areas that are far away from large urban areas and industrial complexes. Areas that you can defend and expand. Because in this type of event, once you stop moving, once you settle in somewhere, people will come. Some friendly, some not so friendly. Be prepared to defend what you have. One will need a food supply and water purification methods. The standard bug-out loads or kits will only get you so far, but planning, skills, and advanced preparation and training will get you all the way. You will need clothing that will suffice for the area you are in, for harsh travel, and the area that you are bugging out to. Weapons. Without a weapon, this will possibly be a very short trip. The reason is because this type of event is one that people recognize this destruction immediately, and those who are already comfortable and willing to take advantage of others in normal life will most certainly step it up to the next level in a situation like this. Distance is the key. If you're not able to get away quickly, then shelter will be necessary. And for those who do have to shelter within the cities or urban areas and cannot leave or evacuate their locations, then we have to be aware of one of the most dangerous factors, and that is other people in the area. Within the first days of the event, other people will run out of food, they will run out of water, and run out of supplies, and they'll be looking for food and supplies, and thus if you have these food and supplies, they will attempt to take them. Stage 2. This is a stage that begins after the first week and lasts until the end of the first year. This will be the period that people truly recognize the range of the devastation, the time in which people have been able to make some sort of communications with others and realizing the damage is worldwide and everyone is affected. The people from rural communities will have begun to form groups and band together. People will be utilizing any and all supplies they have and attempting to restore some aspects of civilized living. The so-called threat of others migrating outward from the cities will be treated differently from community to community. Some communities will decide that strangers are more of a threat than a benefit, and it could turn out to be quite dangerous for someone to wander into their territory. Other groups will possibly determine that people leaving the cities are not a threat and would let them in. This will be different from town to town, but no matter which, one thing remains the same. In this time frame, a survivor will have to establish or locate a place that one could consider the permanent or semi-permanent location for them and their families or group to hold up. This stage will be increasingly difficult as time passes, because scavenging will have taken its toll on urban areas, and there are no longer multiple or many locations and areas that survivors can scavenge anymore. All the good stuff will be gone. This phase will truly test and demonstrate one's ingenuity and self-reliance. It will be necessary to begin developing long-term solutions. Solutions that will enable survivors to possibly grow and cultivate their food, and even the faint possibility of raising some type of livestock and meat or poultry. This will require skills, training, and knowledge that one has to develop beforehand and implement at this stage. If the location that survivors have decided to inhabit is not defensible, then this must be the first priority. Because when the easily obtained food, supplies, and supplies in general have all been scavenged, people will resort to acquiring their goods using whatever means necessary. Without the defense aspect being developed and maintained, the premise of thriving has been nullified by those who do have the combat skills. People will have to begin fortifying their locations and making them more defensible. Everything in our lives is influenced by the technology that provides us with features, products, the rule of law, the rights we have or believe we have. It has given us the ability to learn or find out anything, all with the touch of our fingertips, to communicate with anyone in the world with just a sequence of numbers. And when that technology is no more, some will not react well. This phase will start to see the formation of various groups, territories being defined, and possibly even laws beginning to be established. This will be the time when people have to put all of their skills to use. To survive this phase, survivors will have to understand this new life. They will have to accept that life is now exactly what they see every morning, and the only advances made will be the ones developed on a daily basis. This phase will also put people's technological skills to use. People will begin to harness solar power and other avenues of electricity. One will have to have the ability to maintain a food supply, and this phase will also define our new roles in life and what we will become. It will determine or allow us to determine how we develop ourselves and how we develop our world. Phase 3, existence and rebuilding. This phase will begin about a year after the event and will continue indefinitely. This is the time in which people have settled into their roles and will begin reestablishing communities and production of resources. The communities that can defend themselves and protect their own supplies will have the upper hand. This is the time in which people have learned and mapped out areas that are impassable and still radiated, areas that humans cannot survive in. The human race would have begun to understand its new boundaries and accept them. Communities will begin the task of not just rebuilding structures, but rebuilding in general: schools, education, medical procedures, facilities, and more. This will require working together as localities and cities. People will begin to develop actual security forces and armies. The small areas will have to incorporate some form of currency, some form of trade. This will most likely begin as different currencies used for trade in different areas. This is the time that the gold and silver or other precious metals that a survivor may have stockpiled or prepped or hoarded will definitely regain their value. Across the world, many communities will eventually spring up and development will soon begin. Since mankind had advanced so far with our technology, it would only be a matter of time before these advancements would once again be a part of our lives. To survive this phase will simply require more of the same. If survivors have made it this far, then there's an excellent chance they will maintain that level of survival. A reset isn't the end. Some view this as the beginning, a chance to rebuild society and, this time, to maybe do it better than before. Well, that's all for part 1. Part 2 will discuss a surface burst, nuclear strike, nuclear war. And I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you found it somewhat informative. And for now, Serious Survivor, out.